Despite possessing a $4 billion fortune, Arthur was learning the hard way that extreme wealth only buys paranoid security contracts, imposing iron gates, and entirely new headaches, not actual peace. Right now, dressed in a stained gray hoodie behind the wheel of a mud-splattered 2012 Volvo, he was just an exhausted dad, being barred from his own property by a stubborn rent-a-cop. In just 5 minutes, an otherwise ordinary Tuesday afternoon had devolved into a harsh lesson about power, consequence, and the breaking point of a single father's patience. The heater in the Volvo smelled like burnt dust and old apple juice. Arthur twisted the dial down, listening to the rhythmic, rattling hum of the engine. It was a terrible car. The suspension was shot, the alignment pulled hard to the right, and the check engine light had been glaring at him with quiet judgment for 3 years. He loved it. It was the last car Anna had driven before the cancer tore through their lives, leaving him with an empire he barely cared about, and a daughter who was his entire world. "Daddy, my throat hurts." The tiny voice from the back seat pulled Arthur from the hypnotic drone of the canyon road. He glanced in the rearview mirror. Lily was slumped in her car seat, clutching a battered plush rabbit. Her cheeks were flushed, a sharp contrast against her pale skin. 5 years old, and she had already mastered the art of looking profoundly, heartbreakingly pathetic when a fever set in. "I know, Bug," Arthur said, his voice dropping into that low, soothing register reserved exclusively for her. "We're almost home. Less than a mile. Then it's cherry popsicles and cartoons. I promise. The blue ones? Only the blue ones." Arthur pressed his foot down on the heavy accelerator. The Volvo groaned in protest as it took the steep incline of Oak Creek Lane. He ran a hand over his face, feeling the rough stubble along his jawline. He was exhausted. They had spent 3 hours at the pediatrician's office waiting for a strep test, only to be told it was a viral infection that needed rest. He was wearing faded sweatpants, a hoodie that had seen better decades, and a pair of worn-out sneakers. He looked less like the founder of a global data logistics firm and more like a guy who had just lost a bet. A mile away, past a sprawling line of ancient oak trees and a 12-foot perimeter wall, Claire Montgomery checked her watch. It was a Patek Philippe, understated but mathematically perfect, just like Claire. She stood in the cavernous glass-walled foyer of the Pendleton estate, listening to the hollow click of her heels against the imported Italian marble. She was the CEO of Vanguard Capital, a woman who moved markets with a signature and gutted underperforming corporations before breakfast. She did not like waiting. "Mr. Pendleton is usually incredibly punctual, Miss Montgomery," a nervous voice echoed behind her. Claire turned slowly. Harrison, the estate manager, was dabbing his forehead with a handkerchief. He was a man clearly out of his depth, terrified of his reclusive boss, and equally terrified of the billionaire shark standing in his hallway. "Traffic, I'm sure," Claire said. Her tone was polite, but the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. She walked over to the massive floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the front drive. The estate was staggering. Not garish, like the tech bro mansions down in Silicon Valley, but imposing. Cold. It was built like a fortress. Claire was here to acquire a 40% stake in Arthur's proprietary neural network grid. It was a deal worth billions. She had spent 6 months hunting the elusive Arthur Pendleton, a man who gave no interviews, attended no galas, and seemingly possessed zero ego. "I heard he implemented a new security protocol this week," Claire noted, looking down at the heavy iron gates in the distance. Harrison nodded eagerly, grateful for the change in subject. "Yes, ma'am. Ironclad security. Top of the line. Ex-military personnel. Biometric scanners. The works. Mr. Pendleton wants absolute privacy for his daughter. Nobody gets in without clearance." Claire hummed quietly. She respected paranoia. It was usually good for business. Let's hope they recognize the owner when he finally decides to show up. Back in the Volvo, Arthur rounded the final bend. The entrance to his estate loomed ahead. Massive black iron gates, flanked by thick stone pillars. A brand new, fortified security booth sat to the left, its tinted windows gleaming in the dull afternoon light. Arthur tapped the brakes, pulling the old wagon up to the gate. He reached into his console, his fingers blindly searching through receipts and crushed cereal for the new access keycard Harrison had given him yesterday. Nothing. He swore softly under his breath. He must have left it on the kitchen counter in the rush to get Lily to the doctor. He looked back. Lily's eyes were closed, her breathing shallow and raspy. He needed to get her into bed, get the fever reducer into her system, and just hold her. Arthur rolled down his window. The cold air bit at his face. He pressed the intercom button on the stone pillar. "Yeah, hi. I forgot my pass. Can you pop the gate?" There was a burst of static, followed by a heavy silence. Arthur waited. 10 seconds passed. He pressed the button again. "Look, my kid is sick in the back. I need to get inside." The heavy steel door of the security booth swung open. A man stepped out. He was built like a refrigerator, wearing a tactical black uniform that looked 2 sizes too small, clearly to emphasize the bulk of his biceps. The name tag pinned to his chest read, Greg. He walked slowly toward the Volvo, his thumbs tucked into his utility belt. He didn't look like a man in a hurry to help. He looked like a man who finally had an excuse to use the authority he'd been given. Arthur sighed, resting his forehead against the steering wheel. It was going to be one of those afternoons. Greg stopped 2 feet from the driver's side door. He didn't bend down. He stood tall, forcing Arthur to crane his neck to look up at him. The guard's eyes lazily scanned the rusted quarter panel of the Volvo, the muddy tires, and finally, Arthur's stained hoodie. The contempt radiating from the man was palpable. "Service entrance is a mile down the county road," Greg said. His voice was flat, bored. "Turn it around. Don't block the main drive." Arthur kept his hands on the wheel. He consciously unspooled the tight knot of irritation forming in his chest. "Breathe. He's just doing his job." Harrison told them to be strict. "I'm not service," Arthur said quietly. "I live here. My name is Arthur Pendleton. I forgot my key card." Greg let out a short, scoffing laugh. He leaned down slightly, planting a meaty hand on the roof of the Volvo. The car shifted under his weight. Arthur's knuckles went white. "Right," Greg said, a mocking grin spreading across his face. "And I'm the King of England. Buddy, do you know whose house this is? This is the Pendleton estate. You think the guy who owns this place drives a piece of crap that sounds like a dying lawnmower? Back it up, now!" In the back seat, Lily let out a soft, dry cough. She shifted in her seat, opening one bleary eye. "Daddy, why aren't we going in?" "Just a second, sweetheart," Arthur murmured. He turned back to Greg. The patience was draining out of him, a slow leak turning into a torrent. "Look, my daughter has a fever. I am tired. I am Arthur Pendleton. Call Harrison, the estate manager. Call the house. Check the system. Do whatever you need to do, but open the damn gate." Greg's grin vanished. His jaw set into a hard line. He clearly didn't like being given orders by a guy in sweatpants. He tapped his fingers loudly against the roof of the car. "Listen to me, you homeless-looking deadbeat," Greg sneered, dropping the professional facade entirely. "I don't know if you're trying to case the joint or if you took a wrong turn from the trailer park, but I'm not calling anyone. You have 10 seconds to put this junk heap in reverse and get off this private driveway before I pull you out of that window and physically remove you." Arthur stared at him. The sheer audacity of the threat hung in the cold air. Arthur had spent the last decade in boardrooms with the most cutthroat, vicious corporate predators on earth. He had dismantled monopolies. He had bankrupted rivals who tried to hostile take over his firm. He knew intimidation. This rent-a-cop wasn't intimidating. He was a nuisance, and he was standing between a father and a sick child. "Remove your hand from my car," Arthur said. His voice didn't rise. It didn't waver. It dropped an octave, turning flat and absolute. It was the voice of a man who commanded an empire. Greg blinked, momentarily thrown off by the sudden shift in demeanor. But his ego quickly recovered. He slapped the roof of the car hard. Bang! Lily jumped in the back seat, letting out a sharp, frightened cry. Arthur's eyes went dark. The thin thread of his patience snapped, severing completely. "You're scaring my kid," Arthur said, unbuckling his seatbelt. "I'm going to do a lot worse than that if you don't move," Greg barked, stepping back and resting his hand on the baton at his belt. "This is your last warning." Inside the mansion, Claire watched the scene through the massive windows. The distance was too far to hear the words, but the body language was screaming. The guard leaning over the old car. The aggressive slap on the roof. "Harrison," Claire said, her voice slicing through the quiet foyer. Harrison hurried over. "Yes, Miss Montgomery? Is there a situation at the gate?" She pointed a perfectly manicured finger toward the glass. Harrison squinted. His face drained of all color in a matter of seconds. "Oh, dear God." "Who is in the car?" Claire asked, her eyes narrowing as she watched the driver's side door open. Harrison didn't answer. He was already running. He bolted toward the heavy mahogany front doors, nearly tripping over the threshold as he sprinted out onto the stone driveway. Claire watched him go, intrigued. She slowly buttoned her tailored blazer and followed at a measured, elegant pace. She had a feeling this was going to be highly educational. Down at the gate, Arthur stepped out of the Volvo. He wasn't a physically massive man, but there was a sudden, violent gravity to him. He didn't look at the gate. He didn't look at the booth. He walked straight up to Greg, stopping mere inches from the guard's chest. "You hit my car," Arthur said softly. "You scared my daughter." Greg tried to puff out his chest, but he was suddenly acutely aware of the cold, dead look in Arthur's eyes. "I told you to leave. You're trespassing." Arthur pulled a sleek, matte black smartphone from his pocket. It was a prototype device, not available on any market. He hit a single speed dial button. He didn't break eye contact with the guard. "I'm giving you one chance," Arthur whispered. "Open the gate." Greg sneered, regaining his false bravado. "Or what? You're going to call your lawyer? Go ahead. Tell him ironclad security is doing their job." The phone connected. "Mr. Pendleton." A crisp voice answered on the line. It was David, his head of operations. "David," Arthur said, his eyes locked on Greg. "Who holds the contract for the residential security at the estate?" "Ironclad Security Solutions, sir. We signed a 2-year retainer on Tuesday. Is there an issue?" "Cancel it." There was a 2-second pause. "Sir, there's an ironclad, pardon the pun, termination clause. If we break it without a review board, we owe them the full payout of $4.2 million. "I don't care if it costs $40 million, Arthur said smoothly. "Wire them the breach penalty. Send the termination notice right now, effective immediately. Block their credentials in the mainframe. I want them off my property in 10 minutes. Greg's smirk faltered. He looked at the phone, then back at Arthur. A tiny flicker of doubt began to gnaw at the edges of his confidence. "Hey, man, what kind of scam are you pulling?" Arthur ended the call. He slipped the phone back into his pocket. "It's not a scam, Greg," Arthur said, reading the name tag. "You don't work here anymore." Footsteps slapped hard against the pavement. Harrison came sprinting down the driveway, completely winded, his tie flapping over his shoulder. He looked like he was about to have a heart attack. "Open the gate!" Harrison screamed, waving his arms frantically at the booth. Inside the security booth, a second guard saw the estate manager screaming and hit the release button. The massive iron gates groaned, slowly sliding open on their tracks. Harrison skidded to a halt next to Arthur, gasping for air. "Mr. Pendleton, I am so incredibly sorry. The new team, they didn't have your photo on file yet. They were strictly instructed." Greg went rigid. The blood drained from his face so fast, he looked translucent. He stared at Harrison, then slowly, agonizingly, turned his eyes back to the man in the dirty sweatpants. "Mr. Pendleton," Greg choked out. Arthur ignored him entirely. He turned to Harrison. "Harrison, are these men armed?" "No, sir. Observe and report only. Batons and pepper spray." "Good. Because if he had a gun on his hip when he threatened me in front of my daughter, we would be having a very different conversation." Arthur's voice was devoid of anger now. It was purely administrative. Cold, efficient, and utterly lethal. "Their contract is void. Escort them off the premises. If they resist, call the state police and have them arrested for trespassing." Wait, sir," Greg stammered, stepping forward, his hands raised in a sudden, desperate panic. "Mr. Pendleton, I didn't know. You didn't show ID. You're driving I was just following protocol. You can't just fire me." "I didn't fire you," Arthur said, walking back toward the Volvo. "I fired your entire company. I'm sure your boss will have some questions for you when the cancellation notice hits his desk. Please, man, I got a mortgage. I got a kid." Arthur paused with his hand on the door handle. He looked back at Greg. "So do I," Arthur said. "And mine is sick. And you slapped the roof of her car and told me you were going to pull me through a window. Protocol is asking for a name and verifying it. What you did was an ego trip. You picked the wrong day. You picked the wrong car." Arthur opened the door and slid into the driver's seat. As he turned the key, a shadow fell across the hood of the car. Claire Montgomery stood near the edge of the open gate, her hands tucked neatly into the pockets of her trousers. She had watched the entire exchange. She looked at the panicked, hyperventilating guard, the terrified estate manager, and finally, at the man behind the wheel of the beat-up Volvo. Arthur met her gaze through the muddy windshield. He recognized her immediately. The sharp features, the predatory calm. Claire Montgomery, the billionaire who wanted half his kingdom. He didn't smile. He didn't look embarrassed by his car or his clothes. He simply gave her a curt nod, put the car in drive, and drove past her, the Volvo rattling as it rolled up the pristine, tree-lined driveway toward the mansion. Claire watched the taillights fade. A slow, genuine smile spread across her face. She had spent months reading psychological profiles on Arthur Pendleton. They called him a ghost. They called him a soft-spoken nerd who got lucky with an algorithm. They wondered if he had the teeth required to survive a Vanguard Capital merger. She looked over at Greg, who had sunk to his knees, burying his face in his hands as Harrison barked orders at him to pack his gear. Soft-spoken, Claire thought, chuckling quietly to herself as she turned to walk back up to the house. Right. The man just torched a $4 million contract without raising his voice, all because someone woke up his daughter. She checked her Patek Philippe. The meeting was supposed to start in 10 minutes. For the first time in her career, Claire Montgomery wasn't going to mind waiting. She needed to revise her negotiation strategy. She had come to bully a tech geek into handing over his equity. Now she knew she was walking into a room with a wolf. Arthur pulled the Volvo into the sprawling 6-car garage, parking it squarely between a covered vintage Aston Martin and a pristine black SUV. He killed the engine. The silence in the garage was thick and heavy. He unbuckled his seatbelt, turning around to face the back. "We're home, lily pad," he said softly. Lily rubbed her eyes. "Why was that man yelling, Daddy?" "He was just confused," Arthur said, opening his door and walking around to the back to unbuckle her car seat. He scooped her up. She felt tiny in his arms, her head resting heavy on his shoulder. "But he went home, and we're going inside to get those blue popsicles." He carried her through the interior access door, the heavy steel latch clicking securely shut behind him. He walked through the kitchen, a massive expanse of stainless steel and quartz, completely bypassing the frantic cleaning staff who bowed their heads as he passed. He took the grand staircase 2 steps at a time, holding Lily tight. He didn't care about the mud on his shoes, leaving prints on the plush white runner. He didn't care about the billionaire shark waiting in his foyer. He laid Lily down in her bed, pulling the heavy down comforter up to her chin. He fetched the medicine, the thermometer, and a blue popsicle from the mini-fridge in her adjoining bathroom. He sat on the edge of the bed for 20 minutes, smoothing her hair, telling her a story about a rabbit who lived in a Volvo, until her breathing slowed and the fever reducer began to kick in. Only when she was completely asleep did Arthur stand up. He walked into his master suite. He stared at himself in the mirror. The bags under his eyes were bruised and purple. He stripped off the stained hoodie, throwing it onto an armchair. He splashed cold water on his face. It was time to go back to being Arthur Pendleton, Titan of industry. He walked into his massive walk-in closet, pulling a crisp, tailored black suit from the rack. As he tied his tie, his reflection hardened. The gentle father, who had coaxed his daughter to sleep, faded, replaced by the man who had just dismantled a multi-million-dollar security firm with a single phone call. He adjusted his cuffs. He stepped out of the bedroom and walked toward the grand staircase. Claire Montgomery was waiting. The library smelled of old paper, scotch, and lemon oil. It was a cavernous room on the ground floor, lined with floor-to-ceiling mahogany bookshelves that held first editions Arthur never had the time to read. A fire cracked lazily in the massive stone hearth. Claire Montgomery sat in a leather wingback chair near the fire. She had her tablet resting on her crossed knees, her stylus tapping a slow, rhythmic beat against the glass screen. She had deleted her initial term sheet. The aggressive, predatory acquisition strategy she had meticulously crafted over the last 6 months was gone, sent to the trash bin. You don't back a wolf into a corner and expect it to roll over. You offer it a seat at the table. The heavy oak doors clicked open. Arthur walked in. He looked entirely different from the man in the driveway, yet fundamentally the same. The bespoke charcoal suit fit him flawlessly, armor masking the exhausted father beneath. But the eyes hadn't changed. They were still cold, still calculating. "Ms. Montgomery," Arthur said, crossing the room. He didn't offer his hand. He walked straight to the antique globe that housed a hidden liquor cabinet. "I apologize for the delay. Family matters." "I saw," Claire replied. Her voice was smooth, betraying nothing. "It seems Vanguard Capital isn't the only organization experiencing sudden restructuring today." Arthur poured 2 fingers of Lagavulin into a crystal glass. He paused, holding the decanter. He looked over his shoulder at her. "Do you drink, Claire?" "Rarely before 5, she said. "But given the afternoon you've had, I'll take a measure." "Neat." He poured a second glass and brought it over, setting it on the small table between their chairs. He sat down opposite her, sinking into the leather. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The fire popped. The ice in Arthur's glass shifted with a sharp clink. Claire took a sip. The scotch burned going down, leaving a trail of smoke in her throat. She set the glass down and locked eyes with him. "You voided a $4 million contract because a guard touched your car," Claire said. "It wasn't a question. It was an observation. He touched my car. He threatened me physically, and he terrified a sick 5-year-old child." Arthur corrected softly. "The money is irrelevant. The breach of trust is absolute. I don't pay people to wield authority they haven't earned. I pay them to protect what's mine." A harsh lesson for the security firm. A necessary one. Arthur leaned back, crossing his legs. "But you didn't fly 3,000 miles to discuss my perimeter defense. You came for the neural net grid." Claire smiled, a thin, dangerous curve of the lips. "I did. Vanguard Capital is prepared to offer you $4.2 billion for a 40% equity stake. We want exclusive licensing rights for the predictive modeling algorithm. We scale it, we market it to the defense sector and global logistics grids, and we both walk away richer than small nations." Arthur took a slow sip of his scotch. He didn't blink at the number. $4 billion. It was a sum that could buy islands, topple governments, and alter the course of generations. "No," Arthur said. Claire didn't flinch. She had expected resistance. 4.5, and I keep Vanguard out of your day-to-day operations. You retain technical control. We just want the keys to the commercialization." "It's not a negotiation on price, Claire," Arthur said. He set his glass down. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, stripping away the polite detachment of the billionaire. "You don't understand what the grid is. You look at it, and you see a supply chain optimizer. You see a way to move cargo ships 3% faster across the Pacific. You see defense contracts predicting troop movements." "That's exactly what it is," Claire countered, her tone sharpening. "It's the most advanced predictive learning model on the planet. Your beta tests mapped out global shipping delays a week before the Suez Canal blockage. It's precognition disguised as math." "It's a byproduct," Arthur said. Claire frowned. "A byproduct of what?" "Of keeping someone alive." The room went entirely still. The crackle of the fire seemed to dull. Claire looked at Arthur, really looked at him, and saw the jagged edges of a grief he kept locked behind iron gates and $4 million security contracts. "My wife, Anna," Arthur began, his voice dropping into a flat, clinical register. It was the only way he could talk about it without fracturing. She was diagnosed with a highly aggressive neuroendocrine tumor 4 years ago. The doctors were reactive. They treated symptoms as they appeared. A fever spiked. They gave antibiotics. Tumors grew. They radiated. They were always 2 steps behind the cancer. He stood up and walked toward the massive window overlooking the back gardens. The sky was turning a bruised purple as the afternoon bled into dusk. "I have unlimited resources," Arthur said to the glass. "I bought the best oncologists. I built a private lab, and I realized the medical industry is fundamentally flawed. It looks backward. So I wrote an algorithm. I fed it Anna's daily vitals, cellular degradation rates, blood oxygen, genetic markers, millions of data points a day. I wanted a machine that could predict what the cancer would do before the cancer even knew it was going to do it." Claire sat in silence. The scotch sat forgotten on the table. The ruthless, cynical corporate raider within her was suddenly confronted with a stark, brutal reality. She dealt in hostile takeovers. She dealt in margins. She didn't deal in this. "Did it work?" she asked quietly. "Yes," Arthur said. He turned around to face her. "It worked perfectly. It mapped the cellular mutation pathways with a 99% accuracy rate. It told the doctors exactly where the tumors would metastasize 3 weeks before they showed up on a PET scan." "Then why—" Claire trailed off, not wanting to cross a line she couldn't retreat from. "Because knowing the future doesn't mean you can change it," Arthur said brutally. "The algorithm told us she was going to die. It gave us the exact day her organs would fail. And it was right. To the hour." He walked back to his chair and sat down heavily. "The logistics model you want to buy?" Arthur continued. "The one mapping global supply chains. That's just a stripped-down, sanitized version of the medical core. I repurposed it to generate capital so I could keep funding the primary research. The true neural network is currently analyzing pediatric viral mutations. It's mapping autoimmune disorders. I am giving it away to research hospitals in Geneva, Boston, and Tokyo for free." Claire leaned back, staring at him. "You're sitting on the most lucrative piece of software in human history, and you're treating it like an open-source charity project. I don't need your $4 billion, Claire. I already have $4 billion. It didn't save my wife. It doesn't cure my daughter's strep throat. Money is just insulation. If you don't care about the money, then let Vanguard monetize the commercial applications." Claire pushed, finding her footing again. Business. She understood business. "Let us take the logistics model to the Defense Department. We take the profit. We give you your cut. And you can funnel those billions right back into your medical research. We handle the bureaucracy. You save the world. Everybody wins." Arthur smiled. It was a cold, humorless thing. "Vanguard's primary investor is the Tyrell Group. Tyrell manufactures heavy munitions. You want my algorithm so they can predict geopolitical instability and sell arms to the winning side before the war even starts. You want to use the machine I built to keep my wife alive, to optimize the kill chain." Claire's jaw tightened. He had done his homework. "That's an oversimplification of global defense strategies, Arthur." "No, it's exactly what it is." Arthur picked up his scotch. "The answer is no. I will not sell Vanguard a single line of code. Not for $4 billion. Not for $40 billion. You have no leverage here. You have nothing I want, and I am entirely immune to your threats." Claire stared at him. She was furious, but beneath the anger, there was a profound, reluctant respect. He wasn't negotiating. He was stating facts. He had built a fortress around his daughter, and he had built an ideological fortress around his work. She stood up. She smoothed the front of her blazer. "You're a brilliant man, Arthur." "But you're naive," Claire said, her voice dropping into a low, hard cadence. "You think you can hide behind these gates. You think you can build a god machine and keep it out of the hands of people who want to weaponize it. You can't. If Vanguard doesn't buy it, someone else will steal it. The government will subpoena it under national security laws. You are making yourself a target. Let them try, Arthur said quietly. I'm offering you a partnership. Claire stepped closer, resting her hands on the back of the leather chair. I can protect you from the wolves. I am the biggest wolf out there. Let Vanguard shield the commercial side, and we will bury your medical research so deep no federal agency will ever find it. Arthur looked up at her. He saw the genuine conviction in her eyes. She believed what she was saying. Before he could answer, a sharp, high-pitched wail cut through the heavy silence of the library. The sound didn't come from the room. It came from a small, sleek black box sitting on the edge of Arthur's heavy oak desk, a high-end, encrypted baby monitor. The wail turned into a frantic, wet cough. Arthur's head snapped toward the desk. The cold, impenetrable titan of industry vanished in a microsecond. He didn't just stand up. He launched himself out of the chair, his scotch glass tipping over and spilling amber liquid across the antique rug. "Daddy!" The voice through the monitor was shrill, laced with pure panic. "Daddy! It hurts!" "Lily!" Arthur choked out. He didn't look at Claire. He didn't excuse himself. He sprinted for the heavy oak doors, throwing them open with enough force that one slammed backward into the wall, cracking the plaster. The sound echoed down the massive marble hallway. Claire was left standing alone in the library. She looked at the spilled scotch seeping into the wool rug. She looked at the open door. For a woman who controlled a global financial empire, she suddenly felt entirely irrelevant. She slowly picked up her tablet. She didn't leave. Something rooted her to the spot. A morbid curiosity, or perhaps a sudden, stark realization of her own hollow existence. She had spent her entire adult life optimizing profit margins, cutting out the weak, avoiding entanglements. She had no husband, no children. Her legacy was a bank account and a string of gutted corporations. She walked over to the desk and looked down at the black monitor. She could hear Arthur's footsteps taking the stairs 2 at a time, then a door opening. "I'm here, Bug. Daddy's here." Arthur's voice came through the speaker. It was out of breath. It was trembling. "I threw up," Lily cried. "I'm cold." I know. It's okay. Let's get these wet sheets off." The sound of fabric rustling. "I've got you. I'm right here." Claire stood in the silent, imposing library of the billionaire's mansion, listening to a man worth $4 billion coax a terrified 5-year-old through a fever spike. "My tummy hurts," Lily whimpered. "I know, baby. The fever reducer is wearing off. We're going to take a cool bath, just you and me, like a submarine ride, okay? With the blue boat? With the blue boat!" Claire reached out and pressed the mute button on the monitor. The silence crashed back into the room, heavy and suffocating. She walked back to her leather chair and sat down. She looked at the fire. 30 minutes passed. The sky outside went entirely black. The perimeter lights of the estate snapped on, casting long, harsh shadows across the manicured lawns. Claire didn't move. She waited. Finally, the floorboards in the hall creaked. Arthur walked back into the library. He had stripped off the bespoke suit jacket. His tie was gone. The top 3 buttons of his crisp white shirt were undone, and the sleeves were rolled up past his elbows. The right sleeve was damp. There was a faint smear of baby toothpaste on his collar. He looked utterly exhausted. He walked over to the spilled scotch, looked at it for a second, and then nudged the glass upright with the toe of his shoe. He walked to the liquor cabinet, poured a fresh glass, and downed it in one fluid motion. He turned to face Claire. He looked surprised to see her still sitting there. "She spiked a fever of 103, Arthur said, his voice hoarse. "I put her in the bath, brought it down to 100. She's asleep again. The nanny is sitting with her." Claire didn't offer empty platitudes. She didn't say, "I'm sorry." She looked at the damp shirt, the exhaustion in his eyes, and the absolute lack of pretense left in the man standing before her. "You were right," Claire said softly. Arthur leaned against the heavy wooden desk. "About what? Money is just insulation." Claire set her tablet down on the table. "You have $4 billion, and you just spent the last half hour terrified out of your mind in a bathtub holding a blue plastic boat." Arthur looked down at his hands. "Yeah, something like that." "A Vanguard won't pursue the acquisition," Claire said. The words tasted strange in her mouth. She had never surrendered a target in her life. "I will inform my board that the technology is too heavily entangled in proprietary medical patents to be viable for defense contracting. I'll kill the deal." Arthur looked up. His eyes narrowed slightly, searching her face for the trap. "Why?" "Because you were right about something else, too." Claire stood up, buttoning her blazer. "I am the biggest wolf out there. And if I back off, the rest of the pack will assume the meat is tainted. They'll leave you alone, at least for a while." Arthur stared at her. The silence stretched between them, no longer fraught with the tension of a negotiation, but settled into something resembling mutual understanding. "What do you want in return?" Arthur asked. He knew her kind. Nothing was free. Claire walked toward the door. She stopped at the threshold, looking back at the man who had built a fortress to protect a little girl. "When the medical algorithm is finished," Claire said, her voice dropping to a quiet, level tone. "When you figure out how to predict the mutations, when you cure whatever it is you're trying to cure. Yes? Just remember who gave you the time to finish it." Claire didn't wait for an answer. She turned and walked out of the library. Arthur listened to the sharp, even click of her heels echoing down the marble hallway, followed by the heavy thud of the front doors closing. He stood alone in the library for a long time. He looked at the glowing embers in the fireplace. He looked at the black baby monitor on his desk. Arthur pushed himself off the desk. The business was done. The sharks were at bay. He turned off the lamp, plunging the library into darkness, and began the long walk back up the stairs. He had a daughter to watch over. The sub-basement of the Pendleton estate did not look like it belonged in a home. It looked like the nerve center of a nuclear submarine. The air was kept at a constant biting 62 degrees to accommodate the massive banks of liquid-cooled servers lining the far wall. The only sound was the low, persistent hum of exhaust fans pushing hot air out into the California night. Arthur sat in the center of the room at a brushed steel desk. It was 3:14 a.m. He was staring at a bank of 4 curved monitors. There were no sleek graphical interfaces, no loading bars or colorful pie charts. It was just an endless, scrolling cascade of raw data. White text on black backgrounds, moving faster than the human eye could track. This was the core, the neural network, the machine that was supposed to cheat death. He rubbed his eyes. The gritty feeling of exhaustion felt permanent now. It was a physical weight pressing down on his shoulders, compressing his spine. Ping. A single line of text turned green on the far right monitor. Arthur leaned forward. He tapped a few keys on his mechanical keyboard, isolating the data packet. It was a feed from the Children's Hospital in Geneva. An anonymous file. Patient. 402. 7-year-old boy. Acute myeloid leukemia. The algorithm had been chewing on the boy's genetic markers and daily blood draws for 3 weeks. The doctors in Switzerland were preparing to administer a standard, aggressive round of chemotherapy on Thursday. It was the accepted protocol. It was what the textbooks dictated. Arthur hit the spacebar. The text stopped scrolling. The machine had found a flaw. It had mapped the cellular mutation pathways and cross-referenced them with a billion other data points. If the doctors administered the standard chemo on Thursday, the cancer cells would trigger a rapid defensive mutation. Within 14 days, the boy's liver would begin to fail. He would be dead in a month. But the machine didn't just predict the failure. It offered the pivot. Arthur read the output. The algorithm suggested a delay. Wait exactly 8 days. Let the white blood cell count drop naturally. Wait for the secondary mutation to expose its cellular wall, and then hit it with a highly specific, targeted immunotherapy drug that was currently only being used off-label for adult melanoma. It was a 94% probability of total remission. Arthur stared at the green text. He should have felt elation. He should have felt like a savior. A 7-year-old boy in Switzerland was going to live because of the server banks humming in a California basement. Instead, Arthur felt a suffocating, hollow ache in his chest. He reached out and traced the edge of the monitor with his index finger. "Why couldn't you do it for her?" He whispered to the empty room. The machine didn't answer. It just kept cooling itself, indifferent to the miracles it produced and the ghosts it couldn't exorcise. When Anna was dying, the algorithm was still in its infancy. It was clumsy. It required manual data entry. Arthur had sat by her hospital bed for 70 consecutive hours, typing her vitals into a laptop, while the machines beeped and hissed around them. He had been so focused on the screen, so desperate to find the math that would save her, that he hadn't noticed when her breathing changed. He had missed her final moments because he was looking at the code. It was the ultimate, bitter irony of his life. He had built a god machine to save his wife, and it had stolen his last goodbye. Arthur pushed his chair back. The wheels scraped loudly against the concrete floor. He stood up, stretching his back until it popped. He hit a command on the keyboard, packaging the predictive model and encrypting it. He routed it through a secure VPN and sent it directly to the lead oncologist's private inbox in Geneva. No name attached, no explanation, just the math. They would verify it, see the logic, and change the protocol. They always did. He left the server room, pulling the heavy steel door shut behind him. The lock engaged with a solid, definitive thud. He walked up the 2 flights of stairs, passing the dark, silent rooms of the massive estate. It was a mausoleum of wealth. Imported rugs he never looked at. Art pieces he didn't understand. He finally reached the 2nd floor and walked quietly down the hall to Lily's room. The door was cracked open. The soft amber glow of a nightlight cast long shadows across the floor. Arthur pushed the door open an inch. Lily was sound asleep. The heavy breathing from the afternoon had vanished, replaced by the slow, rhythmic rise and fall of a child deep in recovery. The fever had broken completely. The blue plastic boat was sitting on her nightstand, right next to the empty popsicle stick. Arthur stood in the doorway for a long time. He didn't go in. He just watched her breathe. He thought about the security guard at the gate. Greg. Arthur closed his eyes, resting his forehead against the cool wood of the doorframe. He had destroyed the man's livelihood in 5 minutes. He had nuked a $4 million contract because a scared, exhausted father felt cornered. Arthur knew he was right to protect his daughter. The guard was a liability, an aggressive bully with a badge. But the surgical ruthlessness with which Arthur had ended him, that wasn't protection. That was vengeance. That was a man who couldn't control his wife's cancer taking out his impotence on the first available target. "I'm sorry, Anna," Arthur whispered into the dark. "I'm trying. I really am." He quietly pulled the door shut and walked toward his own bedroom. He needed to sleep. Tomorrow the sun would come up, the world would keep spinning, and he would still be a single father, trying to figure out how to raise a daughter in a fortress. 3,000 miles away, the sun was already up over Manhattan. The boardroom of Vanguard Capital was perched on the 68th floor of a glass tower in Midtown. It smelled of ozone, expensive coffee, and impending violence. The rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows, distorting the skyline into a gray, smeary blur. Claire Montgomery sat at the head of a massive, polished obsidian table. She was wearing a stark white suit, sharp and unyielding. She didn't look like a woman who had just walked away from the most lucrative tech acquisition of the decade. She looked exactly like what she was, the apex predator of the room. There were 12 people seated around the table. The board of directors, older men mostly, men who measured their worth in quarterly dividends and golf handicaps. They were not happy. "You killed the deal." Richard Sterling, the chairman of the board, leaned forward. His face was flushed, a vein pulsing visibly at his temple. He tossed a thick, leather-bound portfolio onto the center of the table. It slid across the obsidian surface and stopped inches from Claire's hands. 6 months of negotiations, Claire," Richard said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "Tens of millions in legal fees. We had the Terrell Group ready to underwrite the entire acquisition, and you fly to California, spend 20 minutes in a room with the guy, and walk away. You didn't even submit a counteroffer." Claire didn't look at the portfolio. She picked up her coffee cup, took a slow sip, and set it down. The ceramic clicked sharply against the glass coaster. The underlying code is inextricably linked to proprietary medical algorithms, Claire said. Her voice was perfectly level. If we acquired the logistics matrix, we would be acquiring his biomedical data. The FDA, the CDC, and the European Medicines Agency would have jurisdictional oversight on our entire corporate structure. The red tape would stall commercial rollout for a decade. It was a bad deal, Richard, so I killed it. It was a lie. A brilliant, bulletproof lie constructed from half-truths and regulatory paranoia. Bullshit! Richard snapped. He stood up, placing his hands flat on the table. I talked to the analysts. The code can be separated. You got soft, Claire. You saw a bleeding heart billionaire giving away software to hospitals, and you lost your nerve. You forgot who you work for. The room went entirely silent. The other 11 board members shifted uncomfortably in their expensive leather chairs. You didn't accuse Claire Montgomery of getting soft. It was tantamount to pulling the pin on a grenade and holding it to your own chest. Claire looked up at Richard. She didn't blink. I work for myself, Richard, Claire said softly. You just collect the dividends. She reached under the table and pulled out a slim, manila folder. She didn't slide it across the table. She opened it, keeping it right in front of her. Since we are discussing fiduciary responsibilities, Claire continued, her tone shifting from polite detachment to absolute zero. Let's talk about the Cayman accounts. Specifically, the holding company you set up last year to short Vanguard's own stock in the tech sector, just before our quarterly earnings report. Richard froze. The color drained from his face so rapidly, he looked like he might pass out. I don't know what you're talking about, he stammered, his eyes darting to the other board members, who were suddenly staring at him with predatory interest. Yes, you do, Claire said. She tapped a fingernail against the top document. It's a clever structure, layered through 3 shell corporations in Belize, but you used your brother-in-law's legal firm to notarize the incorporation documents. Sloppy. I had my forensic accountants tear it apart over the weekend. She closed the folder. You committed federal securities fraud to pad your own personal accounts, Richard. You stole from Vanguard. You stole from me. Richard opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The blustering, red-faced chairman was gone, replaced by a terrified old man staring down the barrel of a federal indictment. Here is what is going to happen, Claire said, standing up. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The silence in the room was absolute. Richard is going to resign immediately, citing health reasons. He will surrender his stock options back to the corporate treasury. If he argues, I will hand this folder to the SEC by lunch. She looked around the table, meeting the eyes of every single board member. They all looked away. Furthermore, Claire continued, pacing slowly toward the door, Vanguard Capital is pivoting. We are liquidating our holdings in the Terrell Group. I want our capital out of defense munitions by Friday. Claire, you can't be serious. Thomas, the chief financial officer, spoke up weakly. Tyrell is 15% of our annual revenue. What are we replacing it with? Philanthropic distribution networks, Claire said. She stopped at the door, her hand on the heavy steel handle. We are going to build the logistics infrastructure for open-source medical data. We are going to fund the server architecture for pediatric research hospitals globally. We aren't going to own the tech. We are just going to lay the pipes. And we are going to do it at cost. Thomas looked like he had been slapped. At cost? There's no margin in that. The board will never approve it. Claire looked back at them. The cynical, ruthless corporate shark had not disappeared. She had simply found a new ocean. The board just lost its chairman to a felony fraud cover-up, Claire said smoothly. The board will approve whatever I tell it to approve, or I will let my forensic team look at everyone's Cayman accounts. She opened the door. Have the resignation paperwork on my desk in an hour, Richard. Enjoy your retirement. Claire walked out, the heavy glass door sealing behind her, cutting off the frantic, panicked whispers erupting in the boardroom. She walked down the plush, carpeted hallway to her corner office. She bypassed her assistant, went inside, and locked the door. She walked over to the massive window looking out over the rain-slicked city. She let out a long, slow breath. Her hands were shaking slightly, not from fear, but from the sheer, unadulterated adrenaline of burning the ships. She had just blown $1 billion hole in Vanguard's revenue stream. She walked to her desk, picked up her secure phone, and dialed a number. It rang twice. "Pendleton," the flat, exhausted voice answered. "Arthur, it's Claire Montgomery." There was a pause on the line. "I thought we concluded our business, Claire." "We did," Claire said, looking out at the city. "Vanguard is officially off the logistics grid, but I have a new proposition for you." "I told you, I'm not selling." "I don't want to buy," Claire interrupted. She leaned against the glass. "I want to work for you." Silence. "Explain," Arthur said. "You're a brilliant coder, Arthur. But you're a terrible administrator. You're sitting in a basement emailing encrypted files to hospitals like a rogue hacker. You have no distribution network. You have no legal shield. If one hospital misinterprets your algorithm and a patient dies, you will be sued into oblivion, and the FDA will shut down your servers permanently." Arthur didn't argue. He knew she was right. "I just gutted my own board of directors," Claire continued. "I freed up a massive infrastructure apparatus. Vanguard will set up a nonprofit shell corporation. We will handle the legal liability, the server distribution, the data encryption, and the red tape. We will build the highway for your machine. You just keep writing the code." "And what is Vanguard's cut?" Arthur asked. The cynicism was heavy in his voice. "Zero," Claire said. "We take the tax write-off for the operational costs. I retain my position as CEO, but the tech remains yours, free and clear." Arthur was silent for a long time. Claire could hear the faint sound of a child laughing in the background of the call. "Why are you doing this, Claire?" Arthur asked quietly. Claire looked at her reflection in the dark glass. She saw the tailored suit, the perfect hair, the utter lack of warmth. "Because I've spent 20 years tearing things down," Claire said. "I want to see what happens when I help build something that actually matters." It took 3 weeks. The Pendleton estate looked different in the morning light. The oppressive, fortress-like gloom seemed to have lifted. The heavy iron gates were still there, but the security booth was manned by a new team. They didn't wear tactical gear. They wore standard blazers. They smiled. They checked IDs with quiet, polite efficiency. Arthur was in the kitchen. It was a disaster. There was flour on the pristine quartz island. A puddle of milk was slowly making its way toward the edge of the counter. The smell of slightly burnt butter filled the air. "Flip it now, Daddy!" Lily yelled, bouncing on her stool. She was wearing mismatched pajamas and a pair of oversized sunglasses she had found in a drawer. The pale, sickly child from 3 weeks ago was gone. She was pure, unfiltered chaos. Arthur slid the spatula under the misshapen lump of batter and flipped it. It landed with a wet smack, splattering batter onto his gray t-shirt. "Nailed it," Arthur said deadpan. Lily giggled, throwing a blueberry at him. It bounced off his chest and rolled across the floor. The kitchen door swung open. David, Arthur's head of operations, walked in. He looked at the flour, the milk, and the billionaire covered in pancake batter. He didn't blink. He was used to it by now. "Morning, boss," David said, setting a thick stack of legal documents on the clear corner of the island. "Morning, David," Arthur said, sliding the burnt pancake onto a plate and handing it to Lily. "Tell me we're done." "We're done," David confirmed, tapping the documents. "The Vanguard nonprofit shell is fully operational. Claire Montgomery's team moved faster than anything I've ever seen. They have legal agreements signed with 72 research hospitals across 14 countries. The servers are securely linked. The liability waivers are ironclad. The algorithm is officially out of your basement and into the world." Arthur stared at the stack of papers. The immense weight that he had been carrying for 4 years, the desperate, manic need to fix the world from his basement, suddenly shifted. He didn't have to carry it alone anymore. "Did she leave any back doors in the contracts?" Arthur asked, a lingering trace of paranoia surfacing. David shook his head. "None. I had 3 independent law firms review it. She gave you exactly what she promised, a bulletproof distribution network at 0 cost, It's almost frightening how efficient she is." "Sharks usually are," Arthur murmured. He picked up a pen, wiped a smudge of flour off his hand, and signed the top page. It was done. The ghost in the machine was finally free to do its work. Arthur had built it. Claire was driving it. Anna's legacy wasn't going to be a tragedy. It was going to be a shield for thousands of other families. "Daddy, I need syrup." Arthur looked down. Lily was holding her plate up, the burnt pancake looking tragic and lonely. "Right, syrup," Arthur said. He tossed the pen onto the counter. He looked at David. "Take the rest of the day off, David. Take the weekend." David looked surprised. "Sir, the quarterly reports?" "They can wait," Arthur said. He scooped Lily off the stool, holding her on his hip. "I'm going out." 10 minutes later, the heavy wooden doors of the 6-car garage opened. Arthur walked past the covered vintage Aston Martin. He walked past the pristine black SUV. He walked straight to the mud-splattered 2012 Volvo. He buckled Lily into her car seat. He climbed into the driver's seat. He turned the key. The engine rattled, groaned, and finally settled into its familiar, terrible hum. The check engine light glared at him. He loved this car. Arthur put it in drive and rolled out of the garage. He drove down the long, sweeping driveway lined with ancient oaks. As he approached the main gates, he didn't reach for his key card. He didn't need to. The new guard in the booth saw the Volvo approaching. He didn't step out. He didn't slap the hood. He simply pressed a button, gave a polite wave, and the massive iron gates slid silently open. Arthur drove through. They turned onto the county road, leaving the imposing walls of the Pendleton estate behind them. The sun was bright, cutting through the morning haze. The air rushing through the cracked window smelled of pine and damp earth. "Where are we going, Daddy?" Lily asked, kicking her feet against the back of his seat. Arthur looked in the rearview mirror. He looked at his daughter. Her eyes were bright. Her cheeks were flush with life, not fever. He thought about the basement. He thought about the code scrolling endlessly on the black screens. He thought about the $4 billion sitting in accounts he never checked. None of it mattered. The insulation was gone. "We're going to the park," Arthur said, a genuine, easy smile breaking across his face for the first time in years. "And then, we're going to the grocery store. We need to buy more blue popsicles. Can we get the red ones too?" Arthur merged onto the highway. The old Volvo picked up speed, the suspension rattling as it hit a pothole. "Only the blue ones, Bug," Arthur said, turning up the radio. "Only the blue ones." They drove away from the fortress, joining the stream of traffic, just another tired dad and his kid, finally learning how to live in the world again. Sometimes the most ruthless thing a man can do is put down his armor. Arthur didn't just break a corporate machine. He built a new one, forced a Wall Street shark to steer it, and finally drove away from his own haunted fortress. Real power isn't a heavily armed security detail or a massive bank account. It's a battered Volvo, a blue popsicle, and the quiet courage to actually live again. If this story of grief, power, and redemption hit home, drop a like and subscribe to the channel. Share this video with someone who knows that the fiercest battles are always fought for the people we love.